right? That my parents were really young in an arranged marriage, carrying
Mhm.
trauma, scarcity, paranoia from war and displacement. And they were just in survival mode. And they didn't have access to like parenting books and certainly
Yeah.
didn't understand like high sensitivity, right? And so I think like, yeah, for a lot of folks like myself and folks, from BIPOC communities, I think it was a liability to be sensitive. Right. And that I think that they were just so concerned about, how like I was really this dreamy, book loving, question asking kid, probably my undiagnosed ADHD at that time. But, was just always like wanting to know more and like was wanting information. I think if Google existed at the time, I probably would have been on Google or, asking a lot of questions. But then it was encyclopedias, right? But yeah, I think it
Mhm.
just seemed like a liability to them that I was just wanted to read by myself in the corner.
Yeah.
And so they were just worried, like how, like, was I going to survive? So I think,
Mhm.
Welcome to Sensitive Stories. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for treatment with a mental health or medical professional. Let's dive in.
Hello, Hong. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. I'm just excited to connect with you a little bit more.
April, yeah, me too. Super excited.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could start by telling us your HSP discovery story, how or when you realized that you're a highly sensitive person.
Well, since I'm a regular podcast listener, I knew you asked this question, so I definitely wanted to have an answer ready. So I think looking back, I think I always knew from a young age that I was different. But out of curiosity, I'm like, okay, no, when did I actually really
Mm.
know? And so I searched through my text email history, and it was actually around 2018 when I first started diving into this. Yeah, so I was reading a lot at that time about INFJs, empaths, Enneagram work. And that's how I stumbled into the world of HSPs. And then I just started devouring everything I could from blogs, podcasts, and of course, Elaine Aron's work. And then once I had that term, HSP, it just felt like so many moments from my life came rushing back, like a mashup of movie scenes playing in my mind. And all those times I was called too sensitive or too much or not enough. And naming it brought a mixed bag of relief and grief, of really being able to make sense of the experiences and revisiting them through like a new lens of like, oh, okay, so like that's why, right? But no, definitely learning that I'm an HSP has been one of the biggest tools and
Mm.
in my road of self-discovery.
I love that. You said, I felt different, which is a theme I hadn't considered before, but hearing other people's discovery stories, I'm like, oh, that is a thread that I see throughout. It's like
Mhm.
I know something's different about me if I don't have the language yet. It's funny, you're like, I was researching other layers, being an INFJ, being an empath. Those are often, the things that lead us to realizing, oh, I'm an HSP. That's what it is. Yeah, I love that. You mentioned this feeling of relief and grief, and I don't think that that's something we've talked about on the podcast yet.
Mm.
This sense of grief. I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about that feeling. What were you grieving when you realized that you're an HSP? Because I had a similar experience. I'm curious to hear your side.
Yeah, I think that grief was just almost like a sadness for my younger self. Right. I think, one of the things I do a lot with clients is parts work.
Mm.
And we talk about the exiled and the wounded part. And one of the key activity is, taking out a picture of your younger self and looking at that version. And so, yeah, when I look at this younger version of Hong, who was told all these things, and uh, I think it is of just so much how adaptable like she was and how quickly she figured out how to survive. But I just want to give her a big hug and just be like, wow, like that was really hard for you, and especially growing up in a family where come from an immigrant family and we spoke a different language and had different values and customs and traditions. So it's almost like navigating like being HSP on top of the cultural and intergenerational differences as well. And so and as we know, grief is so multi-layered that it wasn't just sadness, then it was also anger. Then I was
Yeah.
pissed
Yes.
at all the times that I believed that I was too much,
Yes.
or not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, it's been definitely this like up and down where it's definitely not all roses upon
Right.
discovering and just being like, oh, that's great. But it took a lot too. And I think even with my clients, we talk a lot
Mm-hmm.
about, hey, that the journey of self-discovery is filled with oftentimes the grief or maybe the childhood or the life or the certain um roads not taken, right? So,
Mm-hmm. It's so true that there's so many layers, and I'm constantly reminding my clients you can feel more than one thing at a time. It doesn't have to just be
mhm.
one note. And there can, yeah, I appreciate that. You're like, there's anger and there's sadness and there's all these emotions as you put those puzzle pieces together and think back on not just your present self, but your younger self and what she was going through at the time. I think we really need to make space for all of that. Yeah. And I know you are also someone who identifies not just as highly sensitive, but also a high sensation seeker. And so I'm wondering how do you navigate those two parts?
Yes, lucky me. Yeah. So, at first I was like, okay, cool, HSP, right?
Right.
Just diving into learning about that. And then, but there always was something where it didn't like 100% fit with HSP
Yep.
because I'm like, okay, there's also this other part, right, that craves new experiences and a certain level of intensity and novelty. And so then when I came across high sensation seeker, HSS, like that also clicked too. And and so then I was like, oh, okay, great. Now I'm also this, right? And I just love the way Elaine Aron has depicted it in terms of, it's always like one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
then I'm like, oh, okay, this is why it feels like there's these two conflicting, like dueling personalities almost like
Mm-hmm.
inside of me, right? And that I started to notice a pattern of like for myself and my clients of those who identify as HSP, HSS, through the big five
Mm.
personality traits within
Yes.
psychology. So, the OCEAN,
Yep.
acronym.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to notice that, like for me personally, I scored super high on openness to new experiences, like
Mm.
99th percentile, right? But then I also scored pretty high on, I don't like the word, but it's still neuroticism, right?
Yes.
On the N, right? Which I'm like, they
Yeah.
really should change that. But
Yes.
and so I know that not all HSPs score high on N, but definitely I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed a pattern in myself and clients who like score high on O and then also score high on N,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because like we're the folks who like want to bungee jump or maybe do something new, right? But then we also
Right.
worry about everything that could go wrong, right? And then sometimes talking ourselves like out of it, like entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think adding that HSS side really then helped me to understand, oh, okay. So when I was younger, I definitely leaned more into that HSS side because that was like
Mm.
more acceptable, right?
Yes.
It was the side that was like adventurous and outgoing and that studied abroad and joined the Peace Corps and climbed mountains and all sorts of adrenaline sports, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I definitely put myself in these like unfamiliar or sometimes risky situations
Yes.
because I loved the stimulation and the newness, and also age helped as well, right?
Mm.
Youth.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But I don't think I realized that I was masking a
Mm.
lot because I would just push through,
Yeah.
crash,
Yep.
burn out, and then like need solitude, to recover. And definitely this was before I understood the dialectic, right? The like
Mm.
both and.
Right. Right. That's a good point that when you're an HSS, it is more of an acceptable part, right? You're more adventurous, you're more
Hmm.
spontaneous,
Yeah.
maybe more social, you know, just more adaptable perhaps in that part. But then, right, there's a limit, and at some point you crash.
Yeah. Yes.
What
Yes. I
does
think I
that look like?
confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, since I didn't know it myself, I think I kind of confused maybe former partners, because then, right,
Yep.
we're always sort of putting our best foot forward.
Hmm.
It's not really I always like Chris Rock like joke about like the first 3 months of dating where you're like, oh, that's your ambassador version
Oh,
dating. That's not really you, right?
right.
So I
Yes.
think my ambassador version really like
Mm.
leaned into the HSS. So
Yes.
I would attract, these partners and friends who really enjoyed my HSS side,
Yeah.
right? Which, I did too.
Sure.
But after a
Sure.
while, right, you can only mask for so long. And then I think that part of when you asked about the crash, right? Sometimes it was
Yeah.
actually like literally like a crash or the like,
Yeah.
like hurting myself, right? In some kind
Mm-hmm.
of extreme sport, or just reaching a wall where I'm like, I can't do this anymore,
Yeah.
in terms of whatever the intensity was of going
Mm-hmm.
out, socializing,
Yes.
getting on planes multiple times a month or
Right.
whatnot. That, yeah, it was, I think, a really rude awakening,
Sure.
for myself. And then having to try to explain that to the, people that were in my circles at the time.
Right.
Because, yeah, I think it was really confusing,
Mm-hmm.
for them and for myself before I
Yes.
really understood, oh, okay, like how to find that middle ground and almost
Mm-hmm.
that like regulation
Yeah.
for both the dopamine seeking side, but also like the nervous system
Right.
regulating side.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they seem like such opposites of each other.
Yes.
How do you present day find a balance? Are you making sure that you have space carved out for each, adventure and downtime, or is it a conscious process or is it more in the background at this point?
I would love to say it was in the background, but no, it's still a
Sure.
daily,
Yes.
going to say struggle. But I would say, yeah, we all have our things, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
I've just come to understand, yeah, this is my thing of learning that, yes, there are so many things I want to do and I'm interested in. But I think a little bit of reality testing,
Mm-hmm.
especially again, I know I'm still relatively young, but I've aged. And so just I think owning up to maybe, what some of my limits are now. And I think really doing a better job of checking in the moment too. So I think that's where like my somatic work and meditation
Mm-hmm.
has come in handy, because before maybe I would just push through and
Yeah.
do certain things even if I like felt discomfort, because I've just learned to push through
Right.
discomfort, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
right, I'm like, oh, I don't really feel like doing something, that's because, right, and again, this is where societal messages, that's because I'm lazy, or that's because I'm a
Yep.
scaredy pants, or that's
Yep.
right. So like, instead of being like, oh no, my body just doesn't want to do it. And so now I think I'm much better about honoring like
Mm-hmm.
where I am. And even if it's not what I planned, or
Yeah.
right, but if I wake up that day and I'm like, oh wow, my body's really hurting, or this is what my
Mm-hmm.
body needs, and really having, I think, the confidence to, and the respect of myself
Mm-hmm.
to myself to be like, okay, well, this is where I am today. And then to communicate that,
Yes.
to others as well. But it's definitely something that, with practice has definitely got easier.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still something that I'm still on the journey, as well. So.
Yes, it makes sense that as you build self-awareness and somatic resources, that you can
Mhm.
catch yourself earlier before the crash.
Yeah.
You kind of see the signs. That makes sense.
Yeah, maybe part of his wisdom as well, right? Where now I'm like, okay, if I go out on a Friday night and I do this and I do that, I'm probably not going to have this energy. Or if I
Yep.
schedule this many clients in a row, that's probably not going to be right. So I
Right.
think, yeah, a little bit more, maybe a little bit of wisdom kind of has come in as well. Once you kind of have a certain number of data points and
Yes.
experiences, right? So.
Right. You see the data and the trends.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, okay, I'm my N of one, and I know that like this tends
Right.
to happen, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
So, how has living and working abroad shaped your experiences as a sensitive person or a high sensation seeker?
Yeah, I think in so many ways I've done like accidental exposure therapy on
Mm-hmm.
myself as an HSP, like throwing myself into new loud and sometimes uncomfortable environments
Mm,
through my travels just to prove that like I could handle it. And I can to a certain degree, but it's just not sustainable in
mm,
the long term. But definitely being HSP has felt like a superpower abroad.
yeah.
I can
Mm,
read a room pretty quickly, sense cultural nuances, even when I don't speak the language. I remember when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Peru, I was living with a host family. And yeah, I mean, even though it was a new family and new culture, like new dynamics, I was pretty able to quickly integrate and become part of the community within a short
mm,
amount of time, because I could just kind of pick up on what was sort of expected of me and
right.
the unspoken rhythms of life. And yeah, the beautiful part is I formed deep connections with folks from all
Mm.
over the world and different backgrounds and walks of life.
Oh, I love that. That is a superpower, being able to not only integrate but also respect cultures that you're in, and
Mhm.
just it makes it a much easier transition than you would expect as a sensitive person, since we tend to take more time. But we do pick up context clues, even when there's
Mhm.
maybe a language barrier. And I've had that experience myself traveling where I could just kind of settle in pretty easily. Never put
Yeah,
that
yeah. I think
together
we're
though.
very, no, definitely. It's like the DOES acronym, right? Like the depth of
Mm-hmm.
the observation, like,
Yes.
given just HSPs and our work as therapists, right? I'm a
Mm-hmm.
very good observer and can quickly observe body language. All right. But like, I don't know if you feel this way, but I think learning that like this great strength can also be like a great vulnerability, right?
Yes.
So that ability to like tune in, to adapt, it just means that I've also had a code switch so
Oh,
much,
yes.
right? Just constantly
Absolutely.
changing and almost being
Mm-hmm.
very chameleon like, between the different languages as well, right? So growing
Yes.
up speaking Vietnamese and English, and then I've also, become fluent in Spanish, right? That like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I have lost touch with my own voice,
Yes.
and especially in cultures where maybe being seen as like more outgoing or social is like the right way, right? Like I remember in Peru, you didn't want to be known as seria, which is kind of translates to serious.
Mm.
Right. And you want it to be like, yeah, alegre, right? Like happy and joyful and
Right.
light. Right. So I've just like felt that tension. And so I think one of the ways is just having to create, with again lots of trial and error, safe spaces for myself when like
Mm-hmm.
living and working abroad. So to have touch points that really ground me. And this is where like body work, meditation, talking to like certain friends from back home, and just my own therapy journey has been essential to me, like no matter where I am.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good point, that something that is a superpower, it also has its limits, because you can only assimilate or mask or put your own self aside for so long before it starts to be really taxing.
Definitely, definitely. And definitely it as the older I get as well, I'm just like not that young backpacker who can sleep
Right?
in random hostels or train stations, right? I don't know how she did it. I need quiet. I need my own place to recharge. And so
Yes.
while I still love exploring far-flung places, I just had to get real intentional about like how I
Mm-hmm.
set up my space, and then I think just honor it instead of like, judging it, right? Of just like, oh, why don't I want to share a big house with everybody? Just instead of being like, guys, I love you, but I'm going to need my own separate space.
Yes, always need to have that
Yeah.
space to retreat. Um,
Yeah.
yes. And kind of diving a little bit deeper into some of the challenges. I'm curious, what challenges, patterns you see with the HSP clients you work with who are from immigrant, multicultural, or BIPOC communities. What have you seen?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I just want to say thanks, April, for amplifying, BIPOC
Yeah.
voices. And I was really moved listening to Dr. Lana Holmes share her
Yes.
experiences as a Black HSP, and actually made me reach out to her. So thanks for connecting
Oh,
us.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I think that when we look through like an intersectional lens, right, identifying as an other just adds another complicated but beautiful layer
Yep.
to the experience of being an HSP, right?
Mhm.
And I think like speaking from my own personal experience, my parents are like boat people who fled Vietnam after the war.
Yeah.
And so my mom was over 7 months pregnant with me when she boarded that boat, not
Oh.
knowing if where it would take her or if she would, survive. I was born in a refugee camp in Hong Kong before we
Mm.
gained asylum to the US. And my mom then worked in garment factories and sweatshops while my dad studied English and picked up odd
Mhm.
jobs. they survived and eventually supported other family members along the way. So, I look back, I see that I come from really no nonsense people.
Mm.
Emotions weren't something we talked about, and my parents are definitely not HSPs, lovely people, but not HSPs.
Sure.
The expectation was listen to your elders, study
Mhm.
hard, repay the sacrifices your ancestors made. Right. And so I think looking back, I can hold the duality now, right? That my parents were really young in an arranged marriage, carrying
Yeah.
trauma, scarcity, paranoia from war and displacement. And they were just in survival mode. And they didn't have access to like parenting books and certainly
Yeah.
didn't understand like high sensitivity. Right. And so I think like, yeah, for a lot of folks like myself and folks, from BIPOC communities, I think it was a liability to be sensitive, right? And that I think that they were just so concerned about, how like I was really this dreamy, book loving, question asking kid, probably my undiagnosed ADHD at that time, but was just always like wanting to know more and like was wanting information. I think if Google existed at the time, I probably would have been on Google or asking a lot of questions. But then it was encyclopedias, right? But yeah, I think it
Mm-hmm.
just seemed like a liability to them that I was just wanted to read by myself in the corner.
Yeah.
And so they were just worried, like how, like, was I going to survive? So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think one of the threads I see when working with other, BIPOC or folks who come from marginalized communities or immigrant backgrounds is that there's this additional layer where being sensitive was really seen as this, really bad and potentially um, dangerous thing.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I've always seen the ability to embrace your sensitivity as a privilege because if you
Hmm.
are someone who is in survival mode, you come from an immigrant family where it is about just getting through the day to day, right? Pulling yourself
Hmm.
up. Um,
Yeah.
I imagine your parents are looking at you in the corner with your books and they're like, well, but then they start to worry, right? Is
Hmm.
Hong going to be able to be resilient enough to take this to the next level after all the hard work and sacrifice that they made to create this different life for you? I can understand that, right? I
Hmm.
mean, I'm not a BIPOC person. But there have been times in my life where I was struggling more, where sensitivity had to get pushed to the side as much as you
Yeah.
can because it's always in you, but you do have to mask more. So that, yeah, that could be really concerning for parents. And I wonder, did that also was that or were you aware of that as well at the time? Like, oh, I should be less sensitive or different.
Yes, yes. Because I think being a sensitive kid, you're aware,
Yeah,
right, of
yeah,
what
always.
pleases, and then also a recovering people pleaser, right? And over
Mm-hmm.
parentified. I think
Yep.
that intersection definitely led me to be like, oh, this is what my parents need of me,
Yes.
right? Because I think,
Right.
yeah, they tried to like train me, right? And again, with all the
Mm-hmm.
best intentions, right? That if I expressed any worries, they would tell me, hey, don't be a baby. There's like bigger things like paying the
Yeah.
bills and
Right.
rent and things to worry about, right?
Mm-hmm.
If like loud noises in our like cramped apartment complex overwhelmed me,
Mm-hmm.
they, would really try to focus on gratitude, right? Which again is important, but
Yep.
you should be grateful that we have a home and a roof
Right.
over your head, right? Or
Yeah.
I was always very silly. I'm sensitive to like tags on my like stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? I have to cut them all out and just different like textures of clothing. But then I was deemed like too demanding or picky,
Mm.
right? So I think, yeah, I quickly learned, oh, like don't complain. Like
Right.
the more you complain, you're going to get negative attention, and people don't like that. Right.
Right.
And that again, wanting to help my parents, seeing how hard my
Mm-hmm.
parents were working, like two jobs all the time,
Yeah.
and that, yeah, I wanted to be a quote unquote good kid. So then I
Yeah.
figured out, oh, okay, to be a good kid means like I don't complain about these things, even if they
Yeah.
really bother me.
Right.
So to really try to like younger Hong had to really find different ways to self-soothe, right, in order to complete her tasks
Yeah.
to help her family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand, I mean, again, as an adult,
Right.
right, that yeah, because it is not even comfort, it's not even sometimes convenient for me right?
Right.
For my sensitivities,
Mm-hmm.
where, if I'm on a plane and there's, certain noises, I wish I could tune it out, right? So I
Yeah.
understand that, survival was the priority. But now that
Mm-hmm.
I have, right, again, like you said, the privilege to have more resources,
Mm-hmm.
that I can now tune into what current need needs.
Yeah, right. You can listen to those needs more actively instead of needing to push them aside.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's hard though because, that sensory sensitivity, that tag is can't stop that, but we also have to, make sure that we're acclimating to our environment or what parents need at the time. Because your parents were, I imagine they just didn't have capacity to think about the tags on your clothing.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
and I think they're just very confused, right? I
sure.
think
Mm-hmm.
that again, we also have to look at the intersection of what their values and what was important to them at
Yep.
the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe growing up during a certain time period of Vietnam and in more rural settings, that there are certain expectations
Mm-hmm.
of what kids do.
Yep.
And so I think that through their lens, I was already quite privileged that my
Right.
my main job was to go to school, and maybe
Right.
other things that maybe their siblings had them and their siblings had to do, right? So again, I can see all the different nuances and have compassion now from a distance for all the players, right?
Yeah.
But it was also, oh my gosh, would I have loved if someone could have named that for
Yes.
me as a child, just be like, oh hey, like that's okay that you don't like this tag, like let's just, we'll take it off. Or, oh, you don't like this texture, okay, let's, like, what texture do you like,
Yeah.
let's go look it, right? Because I do
Mm-hmm.
know that the research does show that kids who are HSPs, if they get actually the
Yeah.
nurturance that they need, that is actually like a double bonus, because they
Yeah.
actually then, right, that they really grow up to be very resilient folks who can honor and nurture their needs.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes. Yeah, that, because of our differential susceptibility, we take that good and we just soak it up like a
yeah.
sponge. And we
Hmm.
actually are more resilient, which is not, I think, what a lot
Yes.
of people would expect.
No, definitely. So I remember when I saw that research, it really um, was so inspiring, and I think something that I remind clients, because a lot of my clients, maybe who are BIPOC or second gen or multicultural or whatnot, oftentimes one of the ways they get into therapy is not for them, but it's because
Yeah.
they either have kids or they're thinking about having
Mm-hmm.
kids, right? Or caretaking for young children. And so I think they're realizing, oh, I want to break these, intergenerational patterns or these different messagings,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think they are very heartened when I do share with them, like, hey, like the more you are able to validate and nurture and see and just help your kids
Mm-hmm.
understand about their different sensitivities, it bodes super well, for them, and also could be a very reparative healing process, for
Mm-hmm.
them as well.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if we could get into how you're supporting your clients to overcome some of these challenges we've talked about.
Yeah, I think what I really love doing is, yeah, helping clients sort of kind of be the part of the generation that breaks like some of
Mm.
the old patterning,
Yeah.
and really starts to question, different messaging and whatnot. And that, I think again, we always start off, very slowly. I think for a lot of folks, maybe who have already had a lot of fears, right, about, going into therapy. I know that therapy has changed a lot since when I first went 20 years ago. It was almost
Mhm.
like this, you can't tell anybody thing, right? But these
Yes.
days, right, I think it's a little bit more mainstream, but still, right? I think
Hmm.
to admit that you yeah, need some extra support, I think is always like a amazing first step, right? And I come from it from a very like non-judgmental and very affirming perspective. First, by just honoring all the ways, like their strategies, right? Like things like perfectionism, over parentification, avoidance, even, or being a hyperachiever, right? Like has helped them survive. And I just always remind clients that, like, of how creative they were younger than were
Yes.
to adapt to make it this far, especially growing up with families and cultures that like didn't make room for sensitivity, right? And so I think, the more that they can understand that those behaviors weren't random,
Mm.
that those coping strategies, right, came from somewhere, right? That they had like an adaptive purpose at one point, right? But now, and that younger, it really helped the younger versions of them function and feel safe. But now that really questioning now, like, okay, do those coping mechanisms, do they still serve you, right?
Mm-hmm.
What might be holding you back now, what no longer feels good, right? Because I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
confusion I see from a lot of clients is they're like,
Yeah.
well, perfectionism has always helped me get to this point in my life, but now why is
Right.
it no longer working or having diminishing returns or whatnot, right? Or actually, for so many of my perfectionists, they wouldn't even say perfectionism because they're like, well, I'm not perfect enough to be perfectionist, right? I'm
Right.
like, so, but yeah, I think coming from it, like again, in a very like gentle, non-judgment, very curious way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and such a good reminder that, there's resilience, there's creativity. You figured out how to survive while being
Hmm.
sensitive in an environment that couldn't support your sensitivity, right? The
Yeah.
resources weren't there, the awareness wasn't there, but you got through. And I think that's such a
Yeah.
important piece to highlight that there's strength and resilience there. And now, hopefully, there's some ability to soften. Like a lot of my BIPOC clients talk about that a lot. Is just want to soften and like
Hmm.
let the mask fall down, not be strong all
Hmm.
the time, let more parts of themselves come through. But there is an underlying strength and creativity there that is incredible.
Yeah, no, and that's amazing the work that you're doing and the clients are able to feel that way. And I don't know if you're seeing this, but then there's also a lot of fear of like, well,
Yeah,
now that I'm letting the mask down, like, what if I don't like what I see? Or if
exactly.
what if like other people don't like what they
Yeah,
see, right? Or, oh, like I could have done this, or like,
yeah,
oh, this is who, right? So I think that's
yeah,
where really meeting folks where they're at and taking it very slowly, right? As we're
yes.
unpacking a lot of things, right? That, whether it's through like parts work or EMDR or somatic healing, and definitely with culturally informed care, just to like know that there's going to be a mix of like
Mm-hmm.
emotions, and that there's, I think for some clients, yeah, it's a mixed bag of the joy, like we talked about, and reclaiming those sensitive
Yeah,
parts to be like, wait, so you're saying it's okay? And I'm that like I'm XYZ. I'm like, yeah, it's more than
yeah.
okay. That's who you are, right? But then
Mm-hmm.
there's also like a lot of anger and sadness as they realize
Yeah,
how much their younger selves are like belittled or dismissed, right? Things
yes.
that they would never tell like their child or like another younger person.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, I just think about how your nervous system is wired for protection and keeping that mask on. So it can
Hmm.
even it can feel dangerous to start to take it off. And
Hmm.
especially in this climate, that danger feels very palpable. So even,
Definitely.
yeah, so there's a lot of layers there. And I think that's an important reminder that please, it's important to go at your own pace and not feel like you
Yeah.
have to rush the process or it has to look any certain way. You have to be in control of that.
Yeah, definitely. Because sometimes for some of my clients who, like the overachievers, right, or that type preference, they're like, okay, let's go full steam ahead.
Exactly.
And I also,
Right.
right, have to like slow them down to be like, hey,
Yep.
hey, like, right, we want to like build this slowly, right?
Yep.
We don't want to just pull the rug out from under you
Hmm.
because then you'll have no rug to stand on. All right, we're needing
Right.
to almost like slowly weave like a new
Mm-hmm.
rug, right? As you
Mm-hmm.
slowly start transitioning over, to
Yeah.
another rug. And so I
Mm.
use a lot of metaphors, a lot of imagery, a lot of examples in my work, just like yeah, because I think sometimes it can feel really scary and daunting,
Mm-hmm.
right, to engage in this work, and that I think my clients feel very grounded with me because I think they know, again, without overly disclosing in a non-professional way, but I think they can tell and they know that
Yeah.
I'm on the journey as well. And I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, like no one's perfect here. There's no such thing as
Yes.
perfect. We're all learning how to be, we're all souls
Yeah.
in this human body having these human experiences, right? And
Hmm.
so yeah, sort of almost how do you learn more, about yourself?
Yeah, it's good modeling for them. Like we're all imperfect and figuring it out. And also walking that journey so they can trust you in that process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think clients really appreciate my I mean, they know I have like, all the degrees and they can go look
Sure.
on that and,
Yeah.
see all of those things. But I think what they really appreciate is they're always like, oh, but you don't talk like a doctor or have
Right.
this, sort of, not that I'm not serious like in my work, but I think I really try just to be like, yeah, this is like the human struggle.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it feels really good, right? Because I think back in grad school, sometimes I would get into trouble for not being like professional
Oh,
enough.
sure.
But I think that's what draws people to me. I think I just speak in a really real way, and try to sprinkle in humor when appropriate, right? Because yeah, this is
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes really heavy stuff that
Yes.
we're talking about. So,
Yeah, sometimes you need that levity just to take a breath for a moment.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, I
mm-hmm.
can feel that as you're talking, just that balance of kind of and that solid foundation of knowledge, but also there is some lightness and some playfulness. That's great. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think, again, right? Like, staying within our window of tolerance. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really important. And then for
Yes.
myself as well, right? Like modeling that.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think oftentimes, yeah, I think I have to model it's like, hey, I think we've done enough digging, or, sounds like
Mm-hmm.
we've dug up some things, right? Like, let's just review what we've dug up instead of, I think sometimes there's this, like there's not being an HSP is nothing to fix, right? So I think
Exactly.
oftentimes people are digging to like fix it. Like the more I understand it, the more I'm going to fix it. I'm like, oh, it's not. We're like, there's nothing wrong with you. We're not like here to fix anything. I think
Yeah.
it's really more about that understanding.
100%. Yes. Well, Hong, I'm wondering if this has been an amazing conversation. I'm wondering if there's any final messages that you want to leave with our HSP listeners.
Yeah. I think something I tell myself is just there's nothing wrong with you. Like I said, truly, the way you think, the way you feel, the depth, the intensity you bring to your life, that's your superpower. So, like, surround
Mm-hmm.
yourself with people who encourage that exploration, people who help you get curious about who you are, whether that's through support groups, therapy, books, podcasts. Find spaces where you can hear other HSP stories and like feel less alone. And I think definitely listen to the wisdom of your body. Like if something just doesn't feel good, like just stop. Like even if, and again, even if you haven't tuned into your body for years, and a lot of us are very dissociated from our bodies, like it's always there. You can always come back to it and you can really rebuild that trust with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Such a good reminder that it's always there, even if you've forgotten about it.
Yes, it's still here, doing its thing.
Exactly. Well, thank you again so much for everything you shared today and helping us deepen this conversation, bringing more perspectives into our HSP community. I mean, that's such an important piece. And I will be sharing for any folks that want to reach out to you. I'll share your website in the show notes. And I know you do offer therapy, consulting work. Could you share a little bit more about working with you?
Yeah, like I said, I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm licensed in gosh, 5 states like California, Nevada, South Dakota, New York, DC. I might be missing one, but you can find it all on my website. I added all these additional licensures, especially when it's during the pandemic and just during different periods where I've noticed different groups needing additional support. And so I think that was sort of my offering was getting additional licensures so that I could offer more.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm available for individual therapy, couples therapy, and consultations. And folks can find me, over my website. And I think just to know that, whether you've been in therapy before or you're brand new to it, I think you can see my style is like very curious. And really, yeah, I think just trying to meet you like where you're at, right? How you got to where you are and how you can move forward in a way that feels like grounded and aligned with what makes you you.
Mm.
And that, I think if anything, this conversation resonated, like I'd love to hear from you. So whether
Mhm.
it's reaching out, connecting, or just sitting with these reflections, I just think there's so much power in sharing our story and finding community. So thank you again, April, for inviting me
Yeah.
on and letting me share.
Thank you, Huang. This has been a really beautiful conversation. I loved it.